They have a gang of at least 50 young kids with bats outside beating each other.
In the 1990s, the line between Fox Chase and Abington wasn't just a municipal boundary, it was a dividing line between two worlds. On one side you had Fox Chase, a tight-knit neighbourhood in northeast Philadelphia with row homes, Catholic parishes and corner bars where everybody knew your uncle. On the other, Abington Township was a leafy stretch of Montgomery County suburbia with bigger houses, cleaner streets and schools that seemed to have more funding and more rules. To kids growing up in Fox Chase, Abington might as well have been a foreign country. They joke about how you could smell the suburbs the second you crossed the city line at Cheltenham Avenue. But underneath the jokes was tension, the kind that could flare up at the back parking lot of the Willow Grove Mall or after a Sunday night party when someone from the other side showed up uninvited. The rivalry wasn't just about territory, it was about pride, class and reputation. Fox Chase kids grew up with a certain edge. Most came from working class families where toughness was a virtue and loyalty wasn't optional. Many had older brothers who fought the same fights, hung out at the same pizzerias and playgrounds, and passed down stories about brawls in the Holy Redeemer parking lot. A lot of Fox Chase was considered more middle class, but compared to Abington, even these parts were seen as rougher. Kids from Abington, especially those around Rosslyn and the high school, were seen by Fox Chase teens as soft, more privileged and more sheltered. But in Abington's eyes, the Fox Chase crowd was wild, unpredictable, and always looking to prove something. It didn't take much to spark a fight. A sideways glance at a bus stop, somebody flirting with the wrong girl at a party, a shove in a school hallway, or a rumour passed down through friends of friends. Sometimes the fights were planned, some were impromptu. And then one winter night in 1994, something snapped. That night, a group of teenagers from Abington crammed into a car, gripping baseball bats with numb fingers and tight jaws. Their breath fogged up the windows as they drove into Fox Chase. They weren't looking to talk. They were looking for blood. Eddie Polec was a 16-year-old senior at Cardinal Docherty High School in Fox Chase. By all counts, he was the kind of kid that every parent hoped their child would be friends with. The kind of teenager who still said please and thank you, who showed up to Sunday Mass without complaint. He had come from a family steeped in tradition. His father John and older sister had both walked the same hallways at Docherty. His younger brother Billy, who was 14 years old, had only just started his freshman year there. It was the kind of family where dinner was at the same time every night, and where sports weren't just played, they were earned. Eddie wasn't the kind of kid who coasted on natural talent. When he wanted to join the wrestling team, he didn't just show up, he trained. He filled plastic grocery bags with canned goods, and then ran laps around the neighbourhood. At church, he was an altar boy with a sharp wit and a grin that made even the grumpiest parishioners laugh. During a service project delivering fruit baskets to the elderly, Eddie dropped a full container of strawberries into the church parking lot. Without missing a beat, he scooped them back up, brushed them off, and then turned to the priest with a grin and said, "A little motor oil never hurt anybody." That was just Eddie, earnest, funny, and unpolished in all the right ways. He had a softness to him as well, especially when it came to animals. It wasn't uncommon for him to come home cradling a bird with a broken wing or leading a limping stray dog by the collar. He had a big heart that didn't know how to turn away from something that was in pain. Weekends were sacred, and not just for Mass. If you were looking for Eddie on a Saturday afternoon, you would probably find him at Fox Chase Rec, simply known as the Rec. It was the heartbeat of the neighbourhood, where local boys shot hoops, swapped stories, and tried to act a little older than they were. Eddie wasn't the best basketball player. His friends loved to tease him about that, but he didn't care. He loved the game and just loved being there. At home games, he had a favourite spot, a large boxy seating section above the east basket called the loony bin. From here, Eddie would shout down to his friends on the court and heckle them with inside jokes. One friend, Sharon Donahue, put it simply. He was a nice guy, Not like the other boys. He was friends with everyone. And it was true, Eddie wasn't flashy. He wasn't loud. He wasn't the kind of teenager one would expect to end up in headlines. He was just a good kid. The kind who made people feel like they belonged. The kind who brought humour to Sunday mornings and tenderness to broken-winged birds. The kind who should have had so much more time. It was Friday night, the 11th of November 1994. In Fox Chase, that meant friends, fast food and curfews. For Eddie Polec, it meant what it always meant. Sticking close to home, hanging out at the Rec, maybe grabbing something to eat and making it back home before 11:30 p.m. He liked to end his nights the same way every weekend. Playing pool with his dad in the basement, eating pizza, just the two of them. That night, Eddie was with his younger brother Billy and a group of their friends. Their mother Kathy had offered to cook dinner, but the boys had other plans. McDonald's was calling. Kathy handed each of them $5 and dropped them off at a friend's house. From there, they made the familiar walk to the Fox Chase Rec Centre, just across the train tracks up Rockwell Avenue. It was just a typical Friday night. After the Rec, they headed towards McDonald's. But that night, something felt off. The sound came first. Tires screeching, engines roaring, headlights cutting across the parking lot like searchlights. Then came the people. Cars slammed to a stop and doors burst open. Dozens of teenagers poured out of the cars, and then dozens turned into scores. There were maybe 70 of them. They spilled into the parking lot in waves, yelling, pacing and circling. The air crackled with something meaner and angrier. They weren't there for fries or milkshakes. They were there for a fight. They were there for blood. The feud between Fox Chase and Abington wasn't new. It had been brewing for decades, passed down from one class of teenagers to the next like an ugly family heirloom. The border between the two towns wasn't just asphalt and signage. It was tribal. And sometimes that tribalism turned toxic. Police Inspector John Norris put it bluntly when he said, "In the old days you would have seen fistfights. There was a turf psychology, the Northwest, but that's all over the Northeast." Except it wasn't over. Not really. The tension had been simmering, and all it really needed was a spark. That spark came a week earlier. It started with a car ride. Two Abington girls, Diana and Jessica, were driving behind a car of their male friends. The boys pulled into the McDonald's parking lot across from the Rec, and the girls followed. At first, it was just a stop for food. A few minutes later, a couple of Fox Chase boys walked through the lot, flanked by the two girls. One of them locked eyes with somebody from the Abington car. "What are you looking at?" he said. "Nothing, man. Why don't you keep walking?" came the reply. But it didn't end there. "Do you want to fight? Come on, we'll take it back to the Rec. I'll fuck you up, then I'll spit on your girl." The tone shifted. The girls who had been with the Fox Chase boys peeled away. And Diana and Jessica suddenly found themselves alone and outnumbered. The parking lot filled in fast. Diana said it was like they appeared from nowhere. There were 30 kids, maybe more. She said, "The boys we were with just took off. They left us there." It was chaos. Diana said that they were shoved, harassed, screamed at. They were spit on. Somebody hurled soda into their car. The two girls made it back to their car and sped off. They went home to Abington and told their friends what had happened. But by the time the story made its way through the hallways of Abington Heights, it had changed. Rumours spread that the girls had been raped. Nobody could say by who, when, or if it actually happened, but the rumour didn't need details for it to stick. By the next weekend, the boys at Abington were organising. They started joking about renting a U-Haul to head into the city. They weren't going to wait for another chance encounter. So on Friday night, November 11th, the same night that Eddie Polec was out with his friends, 3 cars left the Willow Grove Park Mall loaded with boys. They weren't just coming to talk. They were armed with baseball bats. On the way, more cars joined in. One filled with girls, including Jessica and Diana. The destination wasn't random. They were heading to the place where it all began. Fox Chase McDonald's. Eddie and a few of his friends and brother were still in the McDonald's parking lot when the Abington teenagers arrived. They stormed out of their vehicles. There were dozens of them, most wielding baseball bats. Some had bottles, some wore steel-toe boots, some just had fists clenched tight. The screaming started first, slurs, threats, demands to fight, and then came the smashing. Car windows shattered, tires screeched again as cars repositioned. A group of Fox Chase teenagers hanging out nearby, and before they could react, the violence erupted. A melee broke out. Punches flew, bats swung, people ran. People who witnessed it said that it was like a riot. Eddie and his friends didn't run at first. Sean later recalled, "It seemed like there were 70 of them. They kept coming. Eddie and I didn't run at first. They didn't have any reason to run. They hadn't done anything wrong. They weren't part of whatever grudge had boiled over. They were just there, caught in the middle. But the fight was everywhere now. Fox Chase teens tried to escape on foot. Abington teens gave chase by car, swerving up streets, hopping curbs, prowling for targets. Eddie and his younger brother Billy and their friend Sean decided to get out of there and walk home. They cut through the parking lot of St. Cecilia's church. It was a familiar place, quiet and usually safe, but not tonight. As they crossed the lot, 5 cars pulled in behind them in formation. Doors flung open and teenage boys poured out brandishing baseball bats. They turned on Eddie and his friends. They took off on foot, but Eddie was at the back. One bat swung hard towards his head. He arched his back and narrowly dodged it. But then Eddie's foot caught on something and he tripped over. He hit the ground hard. Within seconds they were on him. Eddie was punched and kicked from every angle. He tried to shield himself, curling into himself, but it didn't matter. They struck him with bats again and again. Some of them wore steel-toed boots and used them. Sharon Donahue saw it all happen. She knew Eddie. They'd worked near each other at the Huntington Valley Shopping Centre. Eddie cooked at Boston Chicken with her uncle. Sharon worked part-time at Woolworths. She and her friend Terry had been hanging out when they heard the yelling, then the screaming, then they saw the crowd. Sharon started shouting, pleading, begging them to stop. She watched on in horror as Eddie was lifted by his arms and legs and swung back and forth like a rag doll. He was then held up in place as bats connected with his head and torso. They dropped him to the ground, but they kept going. The sound was horrific, the crack of the bat on Eddie's bones. Then came the silence. The attackers fled, rushing back to their cars and speeding off into the night. Sharon ran to Eddie's side. She dropped to her knees and cradled his head in her lap. His face was covered in blood. One eye was shut and the other was rolling uncontrollably. He wasn't speaking, he wasn't moving, but he was still breathing. Sharon recalled, "He was breathing kind of weird, but I thought he was going to be all right. That's what I kept telling him. It's going to be all right." She screamed for help, for someone, anyone, to call 911. She then ran to a payphone and called police herself. Others had already called as well.
There are a pack of kids and they're really noisy and they're screaming. Inside the McDonald's? In the parking lot, please.
Residents had come out of their homes to see what the noise was. Some of them were already on the phone with emergency services. People in McDonald's had already called as well.
I have a bunch of kids out of my parking lot. I just broke one of my customers' windows.
But nobody came. 5 minutes passed, 10, 15, still nothing. It would be 40 minutes before help arrived. By then, Eddie's breaths were thin. He was fading fast. Paramedics loaded him into an ambulance, and their sirens broke the night. They sped towards Albert Einstein Medical Center, but by then, it was already too late. Eddie died the next morning. He was just 16 years old. At the medical examiner's office, Dr. Ian Hood conducted the autopsy. What he found was horrifying. Eddie had been struck in the head at least 8 times with a baseball bat. His skull had been crushed so badly that Dr. Hood compared it to a dropped eggshell. There were half-inch gaps in the cranium. Defensive wounds showed that Eddie had tried desperately to protect himself. The first blow had likely stunned him. After that, he never stood a chance. Within hours of Eddie Polec's death, grief spilled into the streets of Fox Chase. Outside St. Cecilia's church, a makeshift memorial began to grow. People left down flowers, photographs, candles, handwritten letters. The pavement was still stained with Eddie's blood. Somebody had placed a small sign directly over the dried red streaks which read, "I believe in peace, Longcrest." Even students from Abington High School brought a bouquet. The boundaries that once divided the two neighbourhoods, Fox Chase and Abington, suddenly seemed irrelevant. For decades, kids on both sides had traded punches, insults, and territorial pride. But nothing like this. Nothing that ended in a body on the church steps. Now the talk of rivalry was everywhere. But to those who knew Eddie, it didn't fit. He wasn't one of those kids. His friend Sean said it best. It just hurts too much and was never going to make sense. Eddie was the most innocent guy you would ever meet. It shouldn't have been him. The people who did it to him, they were cowards. In the days that followed, Eddie's friends, especially the ones who had been with him that night, were left traumatised. They had to undergo counselling and some of them struggled to sleep. And then there was the threat of revenge. Whispers ran through Fox Chase. Detectives knew the risk. They quickly put a plan in place to prevent any retaliatory violence or vandalism. Extra patrols were stationed on street corners. Clergy and social workers were called in to talk with families. Town watch groups mobilised. Every effort was made to keep the streets calm. Even Pizza Hut joined in. Their marquee, which was visible from the avenue, read in bold block letters, "Please stop the violence." A midnight curfew was even implemented, and police made it clear the fighting had to end. Inspector John Norris stood before the press and addressed the city directly when he said, "We're urging all the parents to talk to their children and know where they are this weekend and other weekends." The message was urgent, almost pleading. And at the centre of it all was Eddie's family, grieving in public under the weight of unbearable loss. They issued a statement, not for justice, not for revenge, but for peace. They asked that no more blood be spilled in Eddie's name. Many of the teenagers promised to honour that wish. Some meant it, some weren't so sure. One teenager said, "If it weren't for his family, those Abington kids would be dead. They want blood." Another then added, "I wouldn't have any problem if one of those kids got killed." It didn't take long for arrests to be made. The teenagers who had taken part in the savage beating of Eddie Polec weren't exactly lying low. By the next morning they were bragging about what they'd done. Some around town, others to friends, laughing about it. 18-year-old Thomas Crook was the first to be arrested. He confessed outright to being involved, but he was quick to insist, "We didn't go down there to kill anybody." Crook admitted to swinging a baseball bat at Eddie, but claimed he never struck him in the head. He said he just got caught up in the excitement. Crook lived in a townhouse complex with his mother and younger siblings. He dropped out of Upper Moorland High School and had a history of minor run-ins with the law. Later that same day, police arrested 16-year-old Nicholas Pinero and 17-year-old Bu Cathavong. Cathavong's family had fled war-torn Laos in 1980, escaping the threat of communist execution. The family had lived in a refugee camp in Thailand before finally immigrating to the United States in search of a better life. Now their teenage son was being charged with murder. All three boys were charged with murder, aggravated assault and weapons offences. One of their defence attorneys tried to put the crime into context as he said, "This is not a typical street crime. Something happens in the space of a few seconds, and a whole slew of lives are changed irrevocably." That may have been true, but to Eddie's family and friends, it was no excuse. On the 16th of November, almost 3,000 people packed into St. Cecilia's church for Eddie's funeral. The same church where just days earlier, he'd been beaten to death on the pavement. the same church where he had once served as an altar boy. His high school classmates were brought in by bus. The pews filled quickly, and by 10 a.m. it was standing room only. Outside, a brown metal casket arrived through the drizzle. Inside, Reverend James Olson stood at the altar and tried to find the words. He told the mourners. He was one of the good guys, a real good person, a gentle person. The priest remembered Eddie as a boy who couldn't sit quite still during Mass. His legs were too short to touch the ground, so he'd swing them back and forth the entire time. It was a memory that made people smile, but it didn't last long. Olson then pleaded with the community, don't let this death lead to more violence. Don't let it fuel revenge. After the service, a procession of more than 100 cars followed Eddie's hearse to Our Lady Grace Cemetery in Langhorne. The rain came down harder as the casket was lowered into the ground. His mother sobbed. His friends stepped forward one by one, placing single flowers on top of the coffin. Then came the fallout. In the days after Eddie's funeral, outrage spread. Not just at the brutality of the murder, but at something else. The emergency response that failed to come in time. It was revealed that on the night that Eddie was killed, police didn't arrive for 40 minutes after the first 911 call. People began asking, would Eddie still be alive if help had come sooner? At 10:10 p.m, a waitress at the Pizza Hut on Oxford Avenue had called 911. She saw teenagers piling out from cars, baseball bats in hand. They were chasing someone, but she didn't know who. She called again and again.
We have a gang of at least 50 young kids with bats outside beating each other.
More calls followed.
What are they doing?
Wow, busting up the cars, windows and everything.
One from a man who tried to hold the phone out the door so the operator could hear the commotion. He was hung up on. Others described gangs of teenagers rampaging through the neighbourhood, smashing car windows, chasing others, and beating people with baseball bats.
I don't believe it. It's rang about 10 times. There's a big commotion going outside in front of our home like a gang fight.
One caller told the dispatcher a boy was being beaten in the church parking lot.
It's a gang
And
fight.
there's a kid hurt out there. Did you get that? Yeah, a kid is hurt outside of the fight. Right? Was that it? Yeah, that's it. Send the police car to them. Wait a minute. You asked me, and I'm asking you. What? I have the information. You can hang up now.
The operator replied, was that it? The calls just kept flooding in.
We've been calling. Everybody in the damn neighborhood has been calling there. And we got a near riot, and there's no damn police around here.
They were becoming more desperate.
When are you going to send somebody?
Who's got a bat, sir?
Who got a bat? Some gorilla. What the hell do you mean?
Wait a minute. Don't talk to me like that. I asked you a question. Who has the bat?
There's a man got a bat.
Is he black or white or Hispanic?
What's going on up here?
Sharon Donahue, who held Eddie's bloody head in her lap as he struggled to breathe, had called 911 as well. She was frantic, screaming, begging for help. The operator snapped back. Listen, if you don't calm down, he gets no help. Do you understand that much?
My friend's bleeding. He needs a hospital. He's bleeding.
Where's he at?
He's at St. Cecilia's at the church.
I can't understand you. Give me an address.
He's at St. Cecilia's.
And where's that at?
It's on Oxford Avenue.
Oxford and what?
It's like... Oh, my God.
Listen. If you don't calm down, he gets no help. Do you understand that much?
I'm trying.
In total, there were 33 calls made to 911 that night. But no one at the police radio room seemed to realise they were all related. The first officers weren't dispatched until 10:41 p.m. A patrol car and a wagon arrived 2 minutes later. An officer then radioed in, he's going in and out of consciousness, need rescue immediately. But by then, it was already too late. A high-ranking police official later tried to explain what had gone wrong. He said the problem wasn't just the delay, it was the system itself. In the past, a person calling the police would speak to an actual dispatcher, often a police officer, somebody who could hear the fear in their voice and then judge the urgencies. He stated, in those days, response time was 2 minutes or less. But now 98% of the radio room staff were civilians, many of them poorly trained. Call takers didn't make dispatch decisions. They simply typed what the caller said into a computer screen. A separate dispatcher decided whether or not to send the car. On that night, the incident unfolding across Fox Chase was marked as low priority. Mary Cianti, president of the Tacony Town Watch, said 911 was a state-of-the-art blooper. Her group had kept logs. On many nights, they tracked 45 to 115 pending calls after 11 p.m, some going back to 5 p.m. She said one major flaw was that the call takers didn't even consider baseball bats to be weapons. When the 911 tapes were finally reviewed, the public was horrified. Police Commissioner Richard Neal announced an internal investigation. Mayor Ed Rendell's Chief of Staff David Cohen promised changes. He stated, "This incident was not handled properly. There will have to be disciplinary actions and there will be reforms made to the system. When you listen to the tapes, it's very clear that some dispatchers behaved in a very inappropriate manner. They were rude and they didn't respond in a way we should expect any municipal employees to respond to the public, let alone a 911 operator." What happened to Eddie Polec wasn't just a tragedy, it was a systemic failure. From the gang violence to the late response to the dismissed voices on the other end of a desperate phone call. And now the city of Philadelphia was left to reckon with it all. The failures of the 911 system weren't the only aspect of the case drawing scrutiny. Attention soon turned to the teenage girl at the centre of the original altercation, the fight outside the McDonald's that had sparked everything. Her name was Jessica. After Eddie was murdered, Jessica sat down with an interview at her family home with her parents and reporters present. She answered some questions but refused others. When asked whether she had talked in Abington about the altercation she had at McDonald's, she didn't deny it. She stated, anyone would go back and tell their friends. Who wouldn't? But then she added something more serious. Me and my friends didn't say anything about getting raped. Jessica believed that it was the rape rumour that brought out the people looking to fight, that it had given them an excuse. She described the night that Eddie was killed. She and her friends had driven down to Fox Chase. She said they pulled into the McDonald's parking lot, but before they even got out, somebody threw rocks at their car, so they left. Thank God we left and didn't stay, she said. Her friend Diana echoed this sentiment. I feel bad for his family, for his mom and dad. I feel bad for my friends too, for the whole situation, she said. At that stage in the investigation, Homicide Captain John Appleton made it clear. What we're doing is checking all of the facts. We will determine who is responsible, beside the 3 we have already arrested. That determination came quickly. 3 more teenagers were then arrested. 17-year-olds Dewan Alexander, Anthony Rienzi and Kevin Convey. Alexander was attending Lakeside Youth Services, a school for students expelled from other schools. Convey lived in Meadowbank, a wealthy neighbourhood. Hardly the place you'd expect to find a teen at the centre of a fatal gang beating. By now, detectives believed they had the full picture. Bu Kathafong had orchestrated the entire thing. He had organised the 5 carloads of teenagers that descended on Fox Chase that night. Kevin Convey had been the first to strike Eddie with a baseball bat. Then Thomas Crook swung his. Nicholas Pinero hit Eddie 6 more times from the front. Kathafong punched and kicked Eddie, while Dewan Alexander kicked him in the head with steel-toed boots. And when Eddie had crumpled to the ground, barely conscious and bleeding, Anthony Rienzi dragged him up, just so the others could get another clean shot at him. Police source later commented, "They're problem kids. They've been busted numerous times. Fights, marijuana, underage drinking problems. They're involved in a lot of assaults." At the same time, accountability was finally being addressed within the 911 centre. 7 operators were disciplined. 3 were suspended with the intent to dismiss. 3 others were suspended and transferred. 1 was referred to a disciplinary board. Mayor Ed Rendell stated, "They're being suspended for abusive and rude responses to callers. That is unacceptable." Reforms were then introduced. The city hired more 911 workers and launched sensitivity training. A new alarm system was installed in the radio room to alert supervisors when 4 or more calls came from the same location. The number of shift supervisors was doubled. But for Eddie's family, none of that mattered much anymore. Days after the reforms were announced, police arrested 19-year-old Carlos Johnson, the man who had supplied the baseball bats used in the murder. At the preliminary hearing, the judge ruled that all 7 teenagers would stand trial for murder. Those accused of wielding the bats, Pinero, Rienzi and Crook, were held directly responsible for the fatal blows. Prosecutor Joseph Casey announced, "I've never seen a skull so fractured. I've never seen a skull where the brain expanded and literally opened those fractures into crevices." In the year following Eddie's murder, the community rallied behind his family. Friends noticed a change in his mother, Kathy. Her eyes, they said, were different now. Matt MacDonald, one of Eddie's classmates, observed, "She has a sadness in her eyes now. There's a spark that's gone." Kathy eventually returned to work as a school crossing guard. It kept her near children. She always carried a pocket full of candy, taffy and lollipops to hand out. She needed to stay close to something good. But she and Eddie's father, John, never stopped asking why. "We wonder if we understood the teachings of Catholicism right." Kathy added quietly, "No way God would have meant for this to happen." As John struggled to reconcile the violence with the world he thought he knew. They had every right to sue over the 911 failure, but they chose not to. John explained, "What everyone hears about is a bunch of rude call takers. It wasn't the 911 people. The whole system could not get the phone calls to the cars on the streets that night. They didn't want money and they didn't want a settlement. They just wanted justice for their son." On the 1-year anniversary of Eddie's murder, hundreds of people returned to St. Cecilia's church. A memorial mass was held, followed by a candlelight vigil on the church steps. The crowd was solemn and reflective, and as they gathered, people began to whisper amongst themselves about the upcoming murder trial and whether justice would truly be served. The jury selection began on the 2nd of January 1996. The 7 defendants were to stand trial together. However, Kevin Convey never showed up in court. He accepted a plea agreement and pleaded guilty to 3rd-degree murder, which carried a sentence of 5 to 20 years in prison. Convey admitted that he had landed the first blow on Eddie that sent him falling to the ground. As part of his deal, he agreed to testify against his friends who were now facing life in prison if convicted. By the 6th of January, a jury was selected: 6 African Americans, 1 white juror, and 1 Hispanic. The trial was ready to begin. The central question was whether the 6 youths had the premeditated intent to kill, a requirement for first-degree murder. The defendants were escorted into court. They looked like college students, dressed in sweaters, slacks, and collared shirts. A far cry from the night they beat Eddie to death with baseball bats. During opening statements, defense attorney Charles Peruto tried to portray Eddie as the instigator. He described him as a beer-drinking tough who sold beer to his friends from a keg. He stated, "Eddie sold his beer, the kids gathered, the spirit was mobbing. It was kind of like a pre-game rally." Another defense attorney, Michael Applebaum, went further. He claimed that Eddie was part of the Fox Chase mob that provoked the massive brawl. He stated, Mr. Polec belonged to a group of youths who turned up anyone who crossed their turf. Prosecutor Joseph Casey refuted these claims, calling them inaccurate at best. Eddie's father, John, added that his son had been working the night of the McDonald's altercation involving the 2 girls. "I think Mr. Applebaum has Ed mistaken for someone else," he said. When Kevin Convey pleaded guilty, he admitted that Eddie wasn't involved in any of the prior clashes between the Abington and Fox Chase groups. The defence's arguments that Eddie wasn't innocent didn't hold up. It was revealed that some defendants faced other charges from that same night. Carlos Johnson was charged with slamming Richard Stubert at the ground and smashing a bottle over his head. Pinero and Alexander were charged with beating John Atkinson in the head with baseball bats. These attacks happened in the moments before Eddie was killed. The prosecutor then laid out the sequence of events. Convey struck Eddie first, knocking him down. He then hit him in the legs and feet before the others joined in. Rienzi struck Eddie in the head, crushing the right side of his skull. Crook hit him 3 more times on the shoulder. Then Rienzi lifted Eddie up by his shoulders and held him while Pinero struck him again and again with a baseball bat. Alexander kicked him at least twice with a steel-toed boot. Cathavong stood nearby and cheered. Dr. Lucy Rourke, a brain specialist, said that the beating caused such extreme swelling in Eddie's brain that it cut off blood flow to his heart and lungs. Photographs of Eddie's brain were then shown in court. His mother, Kathy, later said, "I'm glad they showed the pictures. The jury has to see that. And the families of the kids that did that have to see it too." Teenagers then testified about the earlier incident at McDonald's. William Oler admitted to being part of the Fox Chase group that harassed Jessica and Diana. He confirmed that Eddie wasn't there. Other teenagers then described the attack. Terence Nurse, a member of the Abington group, said he was chasing someone else when his friends attacked Eddie. He told the court what he saw matched what the prosecution said and what Convey said. Defense attorney Peruto suggested that Terence was only spared because he agreed to testify. Terence responded, "I know what I saw." Thomas Ruth testified that he was with friends at a convenience store when the Abington group pulled up. He said it was clear that Cathafong was the leader, and he heard him yell, "Come on, let's go. I'm so psyched I could kill somebody." The defense attorneys were aggressive in their cross-examinations. John Polec, during a court break, commented, "The Fox Chase kids were doing nothing different that night than kids in Fox Chase have done for 30 years. If that's justification for them to murder him the way they did, then there's something really screwed up with the justice system." The other victims testified as well. John Atkinson had been struck in the head at least 10 times with a bat. 14 months later, he still couldn't remember much. Prosecutors used this to argue that Eddie's death wasn't an isolated act. These boys had come out looking for blood. Matthew Malone testified that he witnessed John's attack. He had managed to drag him to safety. He also saw Johnson grab Richard Stuber, slam him to the ground and hit him with a bottle. The courtroom then fell silent as the prosecution's key witness took to the stand, Kevin Convey. He recalled the last moments of Eddie's life. "I heard the boy say, 'I didn't do anything.' He was kind of screaming and crying," he said. Kathy Polec broke down sobbing in the front row. In a surprise move, Convey named 5 other youths who were involved in the fatal beating. Jason Mascione, Jeffrey and Jason Lang, Kem Onis and Ed Rogers. He said that they punched and kicked Eddie before the bats came out. He also said he saw Crook take the bat and hit Eddie several times. But Convey said he didn't see Alexander, Cathafong or Johnson near Eddie during the attack. Their defense attorneys clung to this, arguing that they were elsewhere fighting other kids behind the church. In the second week of the trial, 2 teenage girls, Michelle Batone and Teresa Welsh, testified that it was Convey who may have delivered the fatal blows. They said the first hit struck Eddie on the head, and the attacker kept hitting until it was over. They were referring to Convey. As the trial drew to a close, the defence stuck to their arguments. Their clients didn't kill Eddie. They pointed the finger back at Kevin Convey. In his closing arguments, Prosecutor Casey rejected this narrative as the big lie. He said that each of them were guilty of first-degree murder. He stated, "Eddie Polec was on the ground, pleading for his life, when Nicholas Pinero raised the bat over his head and snapped it. One person by himself wouldn't have gone down to Fox Chase and done that, but together they did. So they are all liable if they had shared the intent to kill." The jury went into deliberation and they returned with a verdict. Nicholas Pinero, Anthony Rienzi and Thomas Crook were found guilty of third-degree murder. DeJuan Alexander was found guilty of voluntary manslaughter. Carlos Johnson and Boo Cathafong were found guilty of conspiracy to commit murder. Some jurors felt that the prosecution hadn't proven the teens set out to kill that night. Others believed that at least 2 of the defendants should have been acquitted. And some thought first-degree murder was warranted. They struck a compromise. Juror Lynn Pester later said, "You had to eat crow. For everyone to receive some sentence, we had to agree to something. It came down to reason and compromise, and nobody came out a winner. Not the jurors, not the defendants, not the district attorney. and definitely not the Polecs. All the defendants were given a second chance at life. Eddie's brother Billy said that his brother might have wanted it that way. He said, "My brother was the most forgiving person you'll ever want to meet, and I wouldn't be surprised if he didn't have a hand in this." Kevin Convey was sentenced first, and victim impact statements were presented. Eddie's father, John, stood before the courtroom and addressed him directly. "Your actions that night allowed my son to die. I can never forgive you for that." Eddie's mother, Kathy, followed. Her voice was steady, but her pain was evident as she said, "I wish I could say you've done the honourable thing, but human nature, being what it is, I believe you had a need to survive. I believe everyone has some decency in them, but I also believe the need to survive is stronger." Then came Eddie's brother, Billy. He spoke about the mornings, how each one started with the same aching thought. What could he have done differently? What could he have done to change what happened that night? He called Eddie a great friend and said the men responsible had stripped him of that. Convey's defence attorney told the court that his client was remorseful, that nothing could bring back Eddie, that Convey planned on writing a letter to Eddie's family. Then the judge handed down the sentence, 20 years in prison. The following month it was the rest of the defendants who faced sentencing. John once again stood and spoke. "All 6 of you slaughtered my son. You took an innocent and real happy-go-lucky kid and beat his brains to a bloody pulp. Don't stand up and turn around and look at me or Kathy or Kirsty and Bill. We've heard you deny this for months. If you're going to say you're sorry, don't bother." Only 2 of them did. Bukathawong stood and said, "I'd just like to say to the Polec family, I'm sorry for my involvement in this whole incident." Thomas Crook said, "I want to say I'm sorry. I hope my wrongdoings and my punishment will somehow help the next generation see what's right and what's wrong." Then came the sentences. Anthony Rienzi was sentenced to 15 to 30 years. Thomas Crook was sentenced to 14.5 to 30 years. Nicholas Pinero received 10 to 20 years. Dewan Alexander was sentenced to 8 to 20 years. Carlos Johnson and Bukathawong both received 5 to 10 years. All of the killers have since been released. Dewan Alexander served 9 years in prison. Kevin Convey served 7 years in prison. Carlos Johnson served 6 years in prison. Bukathawong served 10 years in prison. Thomas Crook, Nick Pinero, and Anthony Rienzi served 15 years in prison. In the wake of Eddie's murder, his father John made a promise to himself that Eddie's death wouldn't be for nothing. He began speaking to students at schools and community events, urging them to think carefully about the decisions they make and who they followed. He said to them, "My son didn't think anything would happen to him. Maybe one kid sitting there has to make a choice in the future." He never charged schools a fee. All he asked was a contribution to the Lost Dreams Living Hopes programme, an organisation that created portraits of victims of fatal violence. John also tried to push for legislative change in Pennsylvania. He wanted the definition of first-degree murder changed so that a case like Eddie's could never again result in what he saw as partial justice. That effort failed, but John wasn't done. He studied 911 dispatch records, looking for every misstep that could have contributed to the delay that night. When the city failed to act on his findings, he threatened to sue them. And he had every right to, and in the end, he forced change. Training for 911 dispatchers was overhauled, with a focus on stress management and better crisis response. Technology was upgraded, including new mapping systems, better software, and computers inside patrol cars. Supervision and oversight were improved across the board. City officials finally admitted what everybody already knew. John Polec had been the driving force behind all of it. Through unimaginable loss, he had become a fierce advocate, not just for his own son, but for every son and daughter whose cries for help might one day depend on the speed and strength of the system. Eddie's life was stolen in a senseless act of violence. But in his memory, his father built something that would outlast the pain. Something that might save someone else's child. And in doing so, John kept a part of Eddie alive. Through change, through purpose, and through the unwavering love of a father who refused to let his son be forgotten. Well, that is it for this episode of Morbidology. As always, thank you so much for listening, and I'd like to say a massive thank you to my newest supporters up on Patreon, Clara, Heather and Samantha. The link to Patreon is in the show notes if you'd like to join. I upload ad-free and early release episodes, behind the scenes, and I also send out some cool merch and a thank you card. There's also a bunch of bonus episodes of Morbidology Plus that aren't on the regular podcast platforms. If you'd like to support the show in another way, please consider leaving a rating and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you may be listening. It's a great way to support a show that you like, and I genuinely do appreciate the feedback. Remember to check us out at morbidology.com for more information about this episode and to read some true crime articles. Until next time, take care of yourselves, stay safe, and have an amazing week.